Hey guys! Tonight we step into a forgotten chapter of history, a journey back to a time when England was fractured, burning, and on the edge of oblivion, and a lone man in a swamp dared to fight back. You won't be a hero, you won't be a soldier, you have no powers, no sword of destiny, you're just one soul trying to survive, to hold on to identity and hope. While Viking axe is close in, tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? And what time is it for you right now? It's incredible how pieces of history bring people together from every corner of the world. Now, let's do this the right way. Turn off the lights. Dim your screen, if you can. Light a small candle, the kind King Alfred once used to measure his prayers, his studies, and his fight against time. And if your screen slowly darkens, don't worry, that's intentional. Why? Because science tells us blue light from screens suppresses melatonin, the hormone that helps you feel sleepy and settled. It tricks your brain into thinking it's still daytime, keeping you alert but distant from deeper states of focus. So let the light fade. Let your mind leave this century. Let it wander back to a time when humans didn't command time. They clung to it. You wake up, not in your bed, but in a thatched hut. The year is 878. The air is cold and smells of ash. You're not alone. Someone stirs the embers beside you, and not to cook, not to stay warm, but to reignite the future of England. His name is Alfred, and tonight you'll discover why he became the greatest king in history. You think being a good leader means what? Posting TikToks? Dropping motivational quotes every morning? Nah. Being a king in the Middle Ages, now that's peak carrying the whole nation on your back energy. And if you think Elon Musk is a complex leader, just wait till you meet Alfred. Full name: Alfred the Great. The guy who was basically a one-man startup, commander-in-chief, university dean, content creator, negotiator, and national school principal. Plot twist. He did all this in the 9th freaking century. That's right. No Wi-Fi, no Canva, no Slack, no coffee-fueled brainstorming sessions, just Viking raids, mass famine, and books written on goat skin. Now imagine you wake up one morning, check your imaginary phone, and boom, your kingdom's on fire. Your people are screaming, and Vikings are partying in your palace like it's Coachella. That's when Alfred stepped in, not with golden armour like some Marvel hero, but with a brain that ran smoother than your MacBook and M2. See? While other kings were sharpening swords and burning witches, Alfred was translating Latin books, opening schools, and building what we now call a national education system. Kind of like AI for literacy, except powered by pure human grit. Rewind for a sec. Alfred was born in 849, the youngest son of Anglo-Saxon nobility, so yes, he was technically a rich kid, but instead of blowing cash on royal chariots or imported falcons, Alfred went on a study abroad trip. Yup, at age 4. He travelled to Rome, met the Pope, and got the holy seal of intellectual approval. While other kids were playing with sticks, Alfred was memorising Anglo-Saxon poetry, because that's just how this man rolled. But destiny wasn't planning a chill ride for him. His kingdom, Wessex, was getting wrecked by Vikings. Economy, dead, food supply, LOL, people, scattered like interns during performance review. When Alfred took the throne, it wasn't a crown, it was a ticking time bomb. If this were a Netflix drama, Alfred would be the main character you think dies in episode 1, only to rise in episode 3 and casually conquer the entire plot. This first episode is just your teaser. Alfred wasn't some royal mascot made famous by history books. He was a strategic genius, a resilient nerd, and a governance icon who deserves more love than your favourite TED Talk guy. If you're wondering why any of this matters to you, a 21st century survivor of deadlines, AI hype, and weird dog memes, then stay tuned. Over the next 29 episodes, we'll peel back Alfred's story like an epic onion of wisdom. Get ready. By the time we're done, you might just scream, "Bro, this guy would have totally been president of Earth by now." So, let's take a little trip back in time. No, not to when Instagram had a chronological feed. Why further? We're talking about 9th century England, a land so unstable. Even Game of Thrones would look at it and say, damn, that's messy. Welcome to Wessex. One of the last Anglo-Saxon kingdoms not completely dunked on by Vikings. The year, around 860 AD. The vibe? Pure apocalypse core. Viking warbands weren't just raiding anymore. They were moving in, setting up shop, taxing the locals, and basically acting like they owned the place. Because, well, they kinda did. England at that time wasn't England. It was a group project between failing kingdoms, Northumbria, Mercia, East Anglia, and Wessex. Except it was the kind of group project where everyone flakes. No one reads the instructions, and the Vikings just walk in and steal the whole PowerPoint. Mercia, folding like origami. East Anglia, already Viking real estate. Northumbria, had a nervous breakdown and never recovered. Wessex, still holding on, barely. Let's talk about what holding on meant. Imagine running a kingdom where your neighbours are constantly on fire. Half your army is off farming because you can't afford a full-time military. The national budget is mostly hope, and please God no more raids. And your capital city is basically a fancy wooden fence and some prayers. That was Wessex. Not a kingdom, more like a soft-shell taco waiting to be crushed under the Viking boot. But somehow, it survived. Spoiler alert, it didn't survive because of luck. It survived because one guy, the youngest prince, the least likely to lead, was paying attention while everyone else was panicking. That's right, our boy Alfred was still technically a side character in the royal drama, but the chaos was setting the stage for his glow-up. Let's break down the Viking threat, though. They didn't just arrive, loot, and leave. That was the old-school model, by Alfred's time. They had upgraded to the Great Heathen Army. Yes, that's what historians actually call it. Imagine a Viking startup that pivoted from raiding to hostile corporate takeovers of entire countries. They had warlords like Ivar the Boneless and Halfdan Ragnarsson, who sound like they came straight out of a metal band because they basically were. Their pitch: convert to our religion, or we'll burn your cathedral, enslave your town, and maybe eat your lunch. Meanwhile, the Anglo-Saxons were like, we have this council of elders? Yeah, good luck with that. So Wessex stood at the edge of total collapse. Its army was undertrained, its allies were non-existent, its strategy? Try not to die. And that's the world young Alfred inherited, a dumpster fire of diplomacy, military disrepair and spiritual despair. If you're thinking, wow, this sounds hopeless, that's because it was. Alfred wasn't born into a golden age, he was born into a slow-motion catastrophe. And that's what makes his rise so iconic. Anyone can lead when things are great, but to lead when your country is literally one axe swing away from extinction? Now that's different. Stay tuned. Wessex is about to go from meh to medieval power move. Let's get one thing straight. Alfred was not your average medieval prince. He didn't spend his youth jousting, drinking mead, or trying to figure out how to behead people more efficiently. No, Alfred was the kid who, at age 7, probably corrected monks on their Latin grammar. He was that kind of prodigy, the kind of rich kid you'd both roll your eyes at and be a little terrified of. Welcome to Alfred's early life, a tale of scrolls, popes, and way too much brainpower for the 800s. First off, yes, Alfred was born into luxury. He was the 5th son of King Ethelwulf of Wessex, which in medieval inheritance logic means you're not getting the crown unless 4 of your brothers mysteriously disappear. So Alfred grew up thinking he'd be a supporting character in the royal family sitcom, the one who'd probably become a bishop, or a backup lord, or just that one uncle with weird hobbies. Instead, Alfred developed one obsession: education. Now, context matters here. In 9th century England, being able to read was about as rare as finding a USB-C charger when you need one. Most kings couldn't even spell their own name without help. But Alfred, that man took reading as a sport. Latin, Old English, religious texts, poetry, you name it. He devoured it. Think of him as the original overachiever, the Hermione Granger of Saxon nobility. At the tender age of 4, yes, 4, Alfred was sent to Rome. Modern parents be like, let's put our kid in a Montessori program. King Ethelwulf was like, let's yeet my child across the continent to hang out with the Pope. And it worked. There. Alfred was blessed by Pope Leo IV, got exposed to Roman grandeur, and basically had his little mind blown. Most kids his age were worried about not peeing the bed. Alfred? He was soaking in the foundations of empire and divine kingship. This Rome trip turned him into a walking contradiction. Part devout Christian, part political strategist, part nerdy monk with royal drip. He came back to Wessex not just thinking about God, but about governance, literacy, and what it meant to be a wise king, not just a strong one, Rhea. Here's where it gets spicy. As he grew up, Alfred didn't just hoard knowledge, he judged people who didn't have it. And honestly, fair. He once wrote how devastated he was to realise most of his noble peers couldn't read or write. Imagine being at a corporate meeting where nobody can read the slides. That's what Alfred walked into on the daily. So what did he do? He made a plan. Even as a prince, Alfred knew that an ignorant ruling class was a ticking time bomb. You couldn't defend a kingdom with swords alone. You needed laws, literacy, and leaders who could think. That belief, that's what would later fuel one of the biggest educational reforms in medieval Europe. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Let's not skip the fact that Alfred was also deeply religious. He wasn't the kind of pray on Sundays guy. He was the full, what would Jesus do if Vikings invaded type. He saw education as part of his faith, believing that understanding scripture was crucial to ruling justly, which is wild, because it meant he saw reading not just as smart, but as holy. By his teens. Alfred had already read more than most kings did in their entire reign, while his brothers were busy defending borders or politicking. Alfred was quietly building a mental arsenal, the kind of mind that could quote psalms and outwit warlords. It's no wonder that when the crown finally landed on his head, we'll get to that dramatic mess later, Alfred didn't rule like a warrior king, he ruled like a scholar with a battle plan. So remember this, before he was the great, before the battles and the reforms and the memes, okay, just me, Alfred was just a weirdly intense, hyper-literate, religious rich kid. The kind of guy who'd correct your grammar mid-sword fight. Next episode, the crown comes calling, and Alfred steps into power at the worst possible moment. Spoiler, he doesn't panic, he plots. Imagine being the youngest sibling. You've spent your life watching your older brothers get all the power, the attention, and the increasingly cooler titles, from Prince of this to King of that. You're just the smart one, which in royal terms is basically useless unless someone needs a speech written or a Latin proverb engraved on a wall. That was Alfred. He was the 5th son. Statistically speaking, his chances of becoming king were about as high as a Viking inviting you over for tea instead of torching your village. But then, one by one, his brothers died. Some from battle, others from illness, and possibly one from being royally overwhelmed. It was like watching dominoes fall, and suddenly Alfred was the last one standing. Congrats, Alfred, you're now King of Wessex. Too bad the kingdom is on fire, literally and politically. Let's break it down. The Vikings weren't just doing occasional raids anymore, they had gone full colonial mode. Entire swaths of England had been converted into Viking franchises, where locals paid protection money or just got eliminated. By the time Alfred inherited the crown in 871 AD, Wessex was the last major kingdom still resisting. And I do mean barely resisting. His army was exhausted, his nobles were fragmented, his people were spiritually wrecked, the very day he became king. Alfred had to fight the Battle of Ashdown, and then 3 more battles immediately after, because the Viking invasion strategy was basically, surprise, it's Tuesday, time for pillaging. And Alfred, he was not ready. All that time studying scripture and translating Latin didn't exactly prep you for screaming warlords with battle axes. He had no experience leading troops. He wasn't a natural battlefield presence. He was cerebral, the guy who would think about the perfect strategy while someone else swung the sword. So what did he do? He survived. He negotiated, he fought when necessary, and he regrouped. Most kings of the time would have either surrendered, died, or tried to escape to the continent and pull a rebrand. Alfred, he stayed, he stalled, he studied his enemy, he turned survival into a strategy. But let's talk pressure for a second. Being a king is already hard. Being a king. When your kingdom is the last Anglo-Saxon domino still standing is next-level nightmare fuel, Alfred had to fight literal Viking warlords, keep morale up when everyone wanted to bail, handle famine, plague, and, hey, my village was just burned complaints, all while being the spiritual head of a Christian kingdom on the verge of collapse. That's not leadership, that's just stress in chainmail, and Alfred felt it. Historical records show he had periods of deep exhaustion, religious crisis, and a constant sense that he was failing God. He wasn't cocky, he wasn't brash, he was terrified, and still kept going. That's what made him different. He didn't win every battle. In fact, he lost a few important ones early on. But here's the thing about Alfred. He learned from failure. Every setback was fuel. Every defeat taught him how to pivot, how to prepare, how to come back smarter. He wasn't a conquering hero. He was a thinking survivor. And that made him dangerous. Because unlike the typical Viking opponent who relied on brute force, Alfred would use time, terrain, politics, and psychology. The guy was playing chess while everyone else was smashing things with hammers. By the end of his first year as king, Alfred had managed to not die, not lose Wessex, and not crumble emotionally, which, given the state of things, was basically a miracle. Next episode, though, he loses everything, and then, somehow, pulls off the greatest comeback in Anglo-Saxon history. Don't blink. Let's paint a picture. It's winter. You're the king of Wessex, but barely. Your army is tired. Your people are traumatized. The Vikings, they've just upgraded to full-on world domination mode, and they're coming for your last stronghold like Amazon Prime with siege weapons. Welcome to January 878, and say hello to the Chippenham disaster. Spoiler, it's not a minor hiccup. This is Alfred's "I just got ratioed by fate" moment. So Alfred's chilling in Chippenham, a fortified royal town and his version of a panic room. It's Christmas-ish, which, in the Middle Ages, meant feasting, praying, and trying not to freeze to death. But Vikings don't do holidays. Guthrum, one of the Viking big bosses, decides now's the perfect time for a surprise attack, because nothing says happy holidays like burning down your enemy's capital. So while Alfred and his inner circle are roasting whatever passed for turkey back then, the great heathen army kicks down the metaphorical door and wrecks shop. Total chaos. The Vikings storm Chippenham like it's Black Friday at Best Buy and everything's 90% off. Alfred barely escapes. Like, full on, crawl out the back window while your kingdom burns energy. He goes from King of Wessex to guy hiding in a swamp in less than 24 hours. Literally, he flees to the marshes of Athelney, a soggy, mosquito-infested island that's about as glamorous as a gas station bathroom. No army, no capital, no backup plan, just Alfred, a few loyal supporters, and a whole lot of mud-based introspection. This is the part where most rulers would call it quits, and honestly, who could blame them? Alfred had lost his royal seat, most of his kingdom, the confidence of his people, his reputation. Even his enemies thought it was over. Guthrum probably sent a text like GGWP LOL, but Alfred, he didn't break. He sat in that swamp, cold, hungry, humiliated, and he plotted. Now this is where legend takes over. There's a famous story that while hiding in the marshes, Alfred was taken in by a peasant woman who didn't recognise him. She asked him to watch some bread cakes baking on the fire while she ran an errand. Alfred, lost in thought, probably gaming out guerrilla warfare strategies, let them burn. She came back, scolded him hard, and he apologised. That story, probably exaggerated, but the message, spot on. Alfred was humbled, reflective, and fully aware of just how bad things were, but instead of wallowing in defeat, he started building something even stronger, not just a resistance, but a revolution. From that swamp, he began reaching out. He contacted loyal nobles. He gathered intelligence. He sketched out plans. The dude was basically building a PowerPoint presentation for how to un-Viking your kingdom, all while living in what amounted to a wet tent. Athelney became more than a hiding spot, it became a launch pad. Alfred began coordinating guerrilla warfare, small, surgical strikes against Viking units. He was rebranding Wessex from Last Kingdom Standing to You Thought We Were Dead, Think Again. It's wild to think. The Alfred we now call the Great was forged not in palaces, but in failure. He learned the hard way that strength isn't about holding a throne, it's about refusing to give up when even the throne is gone. This was his rock bottom, and the next episode, it's his glow up. Get ready, Alfred's comeback is going to be so legendary, it'll make Rocky look like a quitter. Previously on Alfred vs. the end of England, our boy was hiding in a swamp, his kingdom wrecked, his army scattered, and the Vikings out here living their best berserker lives. But Alfred, he wasn't dead, he was evolving. Let's rewind just a second. After the Chippenham disaster, Alfred had every reason to peace out. Seriously, most leaders in his shoes would have booked a one-way trip to Normandy with a fake name and started a quiet life as a monk or something. But instead, Alfred went full main character energy, while Guthrum and the Vikings thought they'd won. Alfred was in the marshes of Athelney doing what he did best. Thinking, planning, and slowly rebuilding a war machine from scratch. Athelney wasn't just a hideout. It became the medieval version of a secret startup, HQ Worm. Imagine Steve Jobs in a swamp, but with swords and bread rations. Alfred began sending messages through a network of loyal nobles and local militias, calling people to rise again, quietly as strategically. He wasn't rushing, he was waiting for the exact right moment to strike. That moment, May 878 AD, Alfred emerges from Athelney like a myth come to life. He's no longer the Swamp King, he's a symbol. Word spreads like wildfire. The king's alive, and he's coming back. He assembles forces at Egbert Stone, a location so dramatic. It sounds like the final boss battle in a fantasy novel. Men from Somerset, Wiltshire, and Hampshire show up. Tired of being pushed around, tired of burning villages and Viking taxes. And guess what? They don't just show up, they show up ready to fight. Now comes the part they don't teach you enough in school. The Battle of Edington, Alfred marches his newly rallied army straight to Edington. Where Guthrum's Viking forces are camped out, it's not just a battle, it's a statement. I didn't come back from the swamp to negotiate. What happens next? Alfred wins. Not just wins, dominates. The Vikings are routed. Guthrum is forced to retreat and eventually surrenders. The man who was literally homeless 3 months earlier just flipped the war with pure willpower, brains, and some probably terrifying pep talks. But Alfred doesn't stop there. He demands terms, and they're not just military, they're psychological. Guthrum must convert to Christianity. That's right. The warlord who once tried to wipe Alfred off the map now has to kneel, accept baptism, and take a Christian name, Athelstan, because nothing screams you lost like switching teams and religions. They formalise it all in the Treaty of Wedmore, which divides England into Viking-held Danelaw in the north and Anglo-Saxon-controlled Wessex in the south. Basically, you stay in your zone, I'll run mine, and if you come back, I won't just win again, I'll go biblical on you. Let's appreciate the layers here. This wasn't just a military comeback, it was a masterclass in psychological warfare, diplomacy, and symbolic domination. Alfred didn't just want a tactical win, he wanted the narrative. He took back control of the story of England, and boy, did he succeed, in one epic move. Alfred saved Wessex from destruction, cemented himself as the only Anglo-Saxon king standing, flipped a Viking warlord like a spiritual pancake, rewrote the future of England. So next time you feel overwhelmed by your inbox or life chaos, just remember, Alfred went from swamp hobo to Viking slayer in less than 6 months. You've got this. Next up, how he turned a war-torn kingdom into a thriving society, with libraries, laws, and some very spicy bureaucracy. So Alfred just won one of the most epic comeback battles in early medieval history. He bodied Guthrum at Edington, forced the guy to convert, and signed a peace treaty that carved England like a birthday cake. Victory lap, right? Not quite. Because here's the thing about Alfred the Great. He didn't want to just win battles. He wanted to build a future, and beating the Vikings at Edington, that was just step one. Let's talk about the aftermath. After Edington, the Treaty of Wedmore was signed, Guthrum got baptised, awkward church selfie, probably. Took the Christian name Athelstan, and swore he'd behave. The Vikings withdrew to what would later be known as the Danelaw, the northeastern chunk of England that basically said, Vikings can sit here, but don't touch anything else. Sounds like peace, right? But in reality, it was a political minefield, because the Danelaw wasn't just a boundary, it was a statement. This land is ours now, and we're not leaving. And Alfred, even with his shiny treaty, knew full well. Peace with the Vikings was always temporary. These guys didn't do long-term leases, they did surprise raids. So what did Alfred do? He didn't relax. He didn't host a medieval brunch to celebrate. He went into full-on post-war startup mode. Why? Because he realised that beating the Vikings on the battlefield wasn't enough. If England didn't change, if it didn't become stronger, smarter, and more unified, then the next Viking invasion would just pick up where Guthrum left off. This was no time to flex. It was time to rebuild the nation. First on the agenda, defensive infrastructure. Alfred started constructing a network of fortified towns called burhs. Not a typo, that's Old English for fortified settlement. Think of them as early warning systems, military outposts, and local government centres, all rolled into one. These weren't just walls, they were systems. They forced invaders to slow down, made it easier to defend the population, and doubled as trading hubs to boost the economy. Translation, Alfred was building a medieval firewall. Then came the snavy. Yup, Alfred basically said. You know what sucks? Being attacked from the sea with no ships. So he built a fleet, not huge, not glamorous, but functional enough to start patrolling coastlines and harassing Viking boats before they landed. Alfred didn't just react, he preempted. He started thinking like a Viking, then out-Vikinged them. And let's not forget diplomacy. Alfred wasn't out here trying to genocide the Vikings. He was smart enough to know that peace meant dealing with them as neighbours, even if those neighbours sometimes burned your barn. So he focused on creating shared laws, encouraging Viking leaders to settle rather than raid, promoting Christianity as a cultural bridge. It wasn't perfect, but it worked. For a time, at least. The Danelaw coexisted with Wessex. Tense? Yes, but it beat constant bloodshed. Here's the lesson Alfred understood better than most kings. Winning a battle is a moment. Winning peace is a process. You don't just defeat enemies. You make it harder for new ones to rise. You build institutions, cities, rules, and identities so solid that even if you get attacked again, the people fight back together. That's nation building, and Alfred, he was already 10 moves ahead. So yeah, Edington was a win, but it wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning of Alfred's second act. The era of construction, reform, and laying the foundations for what would eventually become England. Next time, we dive into the nerdy stuff, books, laws, schools, and why Alfred might actually be the godfather of British public education. Get ready for some surprisingly wholesome king content. Let's get something straight. Alfred wasn't just swinging swords and signing treaties. After the blood, sweat, and swamp water of surviving the Viking apocalypse, Alfred looked at his half-burned kingdom and said, "You know what this place really needs? Books." Welcome to post-war Alfred EPT, the rebrand nobody saw coming. Because while most kings would have spent their victory years building statues or throwing victory feasts, Alfred did something truly wild. He launched a literacy revolution. Here's the situation. After decades of war, England wasn't just physically trashed, it was mentally and spiritually drained. Schools were gone. Monasteries, aka the medieval Google Drives, had been looted or levelled. Most of the clergy could barely read Latin, let alone teach it. Noble kids, illiterate, laws, lost, culture, hanging on by a thread. Basically, England was on life support, and Alfred's diagnosis was, ignorance is the real enemy. So he gets to work. Step 1, revive learning. Alfred starts by importing scholars from Mercia, Wales, and even across the Channel in Europe. He brings them to court and sets up a kind of elite think tank, with the goal of restoring knowledge, language, and leadership. Imagine a medieval MIT but with more robes and way worse plumbing. But Alfred doesn't stop there. He realises most people, or including the nobility, can't read Latin. So what does he do? He starts translating key text into Old English, the language people actually spoke. And by starts, I mean he personally helps translate. The man's out here editing Boethius, Gregory the Great, Bede, and more, like a king who moonlights as a book editor. Seriously, name another monarch who translated philosophical treatises between battles. I'll wait. Let's talk about one of his pet projects, The Pastoral Care, by Pope Gregory XIII. Alfred believed it was essential for priests to understand how to teach and care for their communities, so he didn't just translate it. He sent copies out across the kingdom, with instructions for every bishop to read it, live it, and teach it. It's like emailing your entire executive team a copy of 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, then following up to make sure they actually read it. That's the Alfred difference. Next, legal reform. Alfred's laws weren't just about punishment, they were about principle. He blended existing Anglo-Saxon codes with Christian values and added commentary so people could understand not just what the laws were, but why they existed. His goal? A just society where power didn't always mean oppression. And here's the kicker. He framed justice as divinely inspired wisdom. So even the most sceptical noble had to nod along like, yes, of course, divine wisdom, very legal, very cool. But Alfred knew that none of this would last if people remained uneducated. So he made a bold call. All freeborn boys should learn to read. Not nobles, not priests. Everyone. In a time when literacy was a luxury, Alfred treated it like it was necessity. That's not just revolutionary, that's generational strategy, because while swords defend the present, books defend the future. Alfred didn't just want to survive Viking raids, and he wanted England to thrive without fear. And you know what? It started working. The intellectual revival sparked by Alfred laid the groundwork for the preservation of English identity, the growth of Old English as a literary language, the future rise of England as a cultural and legal powerhouse, all from a guy who once hid in a swamp. So yeah, Alfred the Great wasn't just great because he won battles. He was great because he knew what came after the war mattered more. He turned a kingdom of trauma survivors into readers, writers, and thinkers. In the next episode, we explore Alfred's national security strategy and how he built a defence system that'd make even modern generals sweat. Let's talk about walls, not the metaphorical kind, not emotional walls, real ones made of timber, stone, and sheer strategic genius. Because after Alfred dunked on the Vikings at Eddington and dropped the medieval equivalent of a TED talk on why books matter, he realised something crucial. They'll be back, and when they come, we're not doing this panic and hide in the swamp routine again. Enter the Burr system, Alfred's masterstroke in military defence, civil organisation, and low-key urban planning flex. A burr, pronounced kind of like Burr, wasn't just a fort, it was a multi-tool. Part castle, part emergency shelter, part tax office, part shopping mall, you know, the essentials. Alfred didn't build just one, he built a network. By the time he was done, there were over 30 fortified settlements spread across Wessex, all connected by roads, all strategically placed so that no matter where you were always within a day's march of protection. Let's break it down. Why burrs mattered. 1. They killed the Viking strategy. Vikings were like guerrilla marketers, fast, flashy, chaotic. They hit small towns, raided churches, and dipped before reinforcements could arrive. Burrs ruined that. Now, if they tried anything, they'd run into heavy gates, defensive walls, armed garrisons, angry villagers with pitchforks. Suddenly, raiding wasn't worth it. You can't pillage when the loot is behind a giant spiked wall with archers waiting up top. 2. They centralised control. Each burh had a fixed number of hides, a land tax unit, assigned to maintain it. That meant local farmers and nobles were directly invested in its upkeep. This wasn't just military, it was economic integration. You defend your burh defends you, and suddenly you've got a decentralised but unified national defence system, which in the 9th century was straight up revolutionary. 3. They revived urban life. England had been slowly sliding backward into rural isolation. The Roman towns were long gone. The Vikings burned what was left. But Alfred, he made towns matter again. Burhs became trading hubs, administration centres, schools, courts, churches, markets. Heck, they were probably the safest places in England to get a good cup of mead and complain about taxes. Alfred wasn't just protecting people, he was restarting civilization. And here's the cold brilliance. He published it. Alfred and his team created the Burkale Hidage, a document listing every burh, its location, and how many soldiers it needed. It's like a military spreadsheet from 900 AD. Bureaucratic? Yes. Boring? Not when it helps your kingdom survive. This was transparency, accountability, and logistics, medieval style. But let's not pretend it was all glory. Maintaining burhs was exhausting. It required constant labour, taxes, and tight coordination. There were complaints, grumbling, probably even medieval burnout. But Alfred didn't care about comfort. He cared about legacy, and his network worked. The next time the Vikings came sniffing around, they couldn't just waltz through the countryside setting things on fire. They hit burh after burh and bounced off like confused bees slamming into glass. Modern military historians look at Alfred's system and nod like, yeah, that guy got it. Because what he created wasn't just a wall, it was a warning system, a command structure, and a cultural symbol all in one. Alfred didn't wait for the next war. He designed the map of where it would happen and tilted it in his favour. Next episode, we zoom in on the nerdiest piece of his genius, how Alfred basically created the Anglo-Saxon version of Google Translate and why it still matters. Alfred the Great, Viking Slayer, Swamp Survivor, Fortress Builder, and plot twist. Language nerd supreme. Because while most kings were obsessed with power, land, and occasionally dying from weird medieval infections, Alfred had something else on his mind. Words. Yes, words. As in reading them, writing them, and making sure what everyone else could, too. Let's rewind the medieval tape. By the 9th century, Latin was the official language of learning, law, and religion across Europe. It was the language of the educated elite, aka a tiny handful of monks, who spent more time arguing over punctuation than engaging with the public. The problem? No one else spoke it, and the Anglo-Saxons, they were drowning. Decades of war had wrecked the school system. Most priests couldn't even read their own sermons. Alfred took a long, frustrated look at this mess and said, if the mountain won't learn Latin, bring the mountain some English. So he launched a translation movement. His goal, take the most important Latin texts, translate them into Old English, and make them available to anyone with a brain and a pulse. It was part literacy crusade, part cultural revival, and 100% alpha nerd move. Let's talk greatest hits. Time Pastoral Care by Pope Gregory. This wasn't just a book. It was a class manual for leadership. How to guide your people, think clearly, and keep your moral compass while ruling. Alfred didn't just translate it. He wrote a freaking preface, where he low-key dragged the current state of English education and dropped quotes like a medieval influencer. Then he sent copies out to bishops, with a special stick, yes, a literal pointer stick to help them teach it. Consolation of Philosophy by Boethius. This is a deep, introspective work on suffering, fate, and why bad things happen to good people. It's the kind of book you'd read during a midlife crisis. Or, in Alfred's case, after losing half your kingdom to Vikings. His translation, personal, emotional, it included original additions and reflections. It wasn't just a translation, it was therapy, with footnotes. The History of the English Church and People by Bede. Alfred wanted people to understand where they came from, so he made sure this history got translated too. It was about roots, building national identity through shared stories. If the sword defended the borders, this book defended the soul. But here's where it gets even cooler. Alfred didn't just translate, he adapted. He simplified complex concepts, updated references, and inserted commentary so the average reader could actually understand. This wasn't about showing off, it was about building a thinking culture. He basically did the medieval version of SparkNotes, but written by the king himself. And the impact, massive. He helped standardise Old English as a written language. Before Alfred, it was mostly spoken, with few texts. After Alfred, it became the vehicle for law, learning, and leadership. He didn't just make knowledge accessible, he made English powerful. Centuries later, that foundation would evolve into Middle English, then Modern English, then Shakespeare, then memes. So yes, without Alfred's translation obsession, your English lit class and probably your entire Twitter feed wouldn't exist. Let's appreciate the subtle genius here. While other rulers expanded empires, Alfred expanded literacy. While others collected crowns, he collected ideas. He knew that words outlast war, that memory is fragile, that if people can't read their own history, they'll lose it, and he made sure England never did. Here's the thing about Alfred the Great. He wasn't just trying to survive the Vikings. He wasn't just trying to teach people Latin. He wasn't just building walls, books, and badass burrs. He was building something bigger, a legacy. Because Alfred knew the real flex wasn't being King of Wessex. The real power move was being the half-founder of a dynasty that would one day rule all of England. Let's start with the basics. Alfred didn't have time to sit around and make TikToks about his morning routine. His entire reign was a crash course in emergency leadership. But even as he juggled wars, translations, and rebuilding society, he kept one eye on the long game. Succession. Alfred didn't want a repeat of the chaos that followed earlier Anglo-Saxon kings, where every power vacuum turned into a sword fight between cousins. So he did something revolutionary. He built a sus bloodline blueprint. Step 1. Marry strategically. Alfred married Ealhswith, a noblewoman from Mercia. This wasn't just a royal Tinder match, it was a cis-political alliance. By tying himself to Mercian nobility, Alfred brought two major Anglo-Saxon houses into closer cooperation. It was less about romance and more about regional power consolidation. Think less rom-com, more medieval NATO. Step 2. Raise heirs like warriors and scholars. Alfred had several children, but two stand out. Edward the Elder. 2. Æthelflæ, Lady of the Mercians. Yes, that's right. His daughter became a royal military leader. But hold that thought. Alfred didn't just give his kids swords and say, good luck. He trained to us them in strategy, faith, governance, and, yes, literature. Because Alfred's idea of ruling wasn't about brute force, it was about brain plus blade. Let's talk Edward up. Alfred made sure Edward was visible, fighting in battles, learning the ropes, earning respect. By the time Alfred died, Edward wasn't some spoiled princeling. He was battle-tested, and he kept the Alfred flame alive. Under Edward, the fight against the Vikings didn't just continue, it expanded. He began reclaiming Danelaw territory and setting the stage for full unification. But even more iconic, Æthelflæ. Most medieval women were expected to smile, marry, and maybe die in childbirth. Ethel fled. She became Lady of the Mercians, a title that was basically queen without the crown, because the people chose her. Why? Because she was fierce. After Alfred's death, Æthelflæ led armies, built burhs, and took Viking-held towns like it was her hobby. She even launched a campaign to take back Derby, one of the 5 boroughs of the Danelaw, and Vikings feared her. Anglo-Saxons adored her. Historians are still trying to figure out why there isn't a Netflix series about her. So Alfred's dynasty wasn't just about keeping the crown in the family, it was about creating leaders who could earn it. He knew that a kingdom built on one man's greatness dies with him. but a kingdom built on shared values, strong alliances and trained heirs. That just lasts. And the proof? Edward and Ethelflaed's efforts led directly to the reign of Athelstan, Alfred's grandson, who became the first king of a unified England. So next time someone calls Alfred great, remember, he wasn't just a warrior, he was a visionary patriarch who made sure the next generation wouldn't just inherit a kingdom, they'd expand it. Next up, Alfred's soft power game, how he used religion, symbols, and cultural identity to forge unity in a fractured land, unifying a country in the 9th century. No Wi-Fi, no TikTok, no morning podcasts, just plagues, Vikings, and a ton of illiteracy. So how did Alfred the Great take a fractured, war-torn mess of a land and start turning it into England? 2 words, soft power. Because while Alfred could swing a sword, his real genius lay in something way more subtle, convincing people to believe. Let's break this down. Post-Viking apocalypse. England wasn't exactly vibing with unity. You had different kingdoms with different rulers, multiple dialects, divided religious practices, a population exhausted by trauma and famine. Alfred needed more than military wins. He needed identity, something that would make people feel like they were part of something bigger than just surviving until Tuesday. Step 1, religion as glue. Alfred didn't just use Christianity as a personal faith, he used it as a national brand. He positioned Wessex as the chosen defender of the Christian realm. Vikings weren't just enemies of the state, they were enemies of God. By framing the war as good versus evil, he gave it moral weight. Suddenly, defending your town wasn't just self-preservation, it was divine duty. Alfred also made sure churches were rebuilt, priests were retrained, and scripture was translated into Old English so everyone could understand the gospel. It wasn't just salvation, it was a statecraft. Step 2, symbolic storytelling. Alfred understood the power of narrative. He wasn't just King of Wessex, he was King of the Anglo-Saxons, a title that didn't technically exist before he made it up. It was a flex, a declaration, a rebrand. He used historical texts like Bede's history to promote a shared past, a mythos of noble ancestors, Christian kings, and divine purpose. That stuff sticks. When people feel like they belong to an ancient, holy, culturally superior tribe, they fight harder, they obey more, they pass stories down. That's not control, that's culture. Step 3, visual propaganda. Flags? Not quite, but coins? Absolutely. Alfred minted coins with his face, bold, confident, and often surrounded by crosses or inscriptions about God's grace. He knew that currency is messaging. People might not read, but they saw those coins every day. It said, this is your king, this is your realm, this is your god. Boom, identity in your pocket. Step 4, law as unity. Alfred's legal reforms weren't just practical, they were symbolic. He wrote his law code in Old English and not Latin, and prefaced it with the 10 Commandments. He quoted Moses, then he quoted King of Wessex, then he quoted himself. Why? To show that our God's law and Anglo-Saxon tradition were one, to create a through line of legitimacy. Every village that obeyed those laws was connected to the centre, to him. That's cohesion by legal design. Step 5, national language. Alfred's literacy reforms weren't just educational, they were political. A shared language, Old English, just meant shared ideas, shared texts, shared laws, shared identity. Before Alfred, local dialects dominated. After Alfred, Old English became the tool of governance. That's nation building with a dictionary. So yeah, Alfred didn't need the internet. He had something better. A belief system, a story, a legal code, a face on a coin, and a message so strong it outlived the Vikings. He didn't just fight for England. He invented it. Alfred the Great died in 899 AD, exhausted, probably in pain, and absolutely unaware that 1,000 years later, people would still be talking about him like he was the medieval equivalent of Captain America crossed with Wikipedia. But here's the wild part. Alfred didn't just make history, he rewired it. His legacy didn't fade after his death. It deepened. His reforms, his ideas, his soft power playbook, they shaped England for centuries. Let's explore what happened after Alfred. First up, his kids knew the assignment. As we saw earlier, Alfred's son, Edward the Elder, and daughter, Ethelfled, didn't just preserve their dad's kingdom, they expanded it. Edward consolidated power and pushed into Viking-held territory. Ethelfled launched military campaigns, built burhs, and basically co-ran Mercia like a strategist in armour. Together, they kept the Alfred flame alive and turned it into policy. That continuity? Rare. Alfred wasn't a fluke. He was the start of something. Then came Athelstan, Alfred's grandson. And hoo boy, this guy went full supernova. Athelstan built on everything Alfred set up, from legal reforms to military structures to the whole unity via Christianity thing, and became the first official king of all England. He beat the Vikings, he flexed on Scotland, he hosted delegations from Europe. In short, he took Alfred's foundation and thus finished the cathedral. But it wasn't just bloodline. Alfred's legal code influenced kings for generations, from Ethelred to Nut to Edward the Confessor. Royal courts kept using Alfred's mix of custom law and Christian ethics. Even William the Conqueror, after 1066, kept some of Alfred's laws because they worked. They were, understandable, just, rooted in both faith and tradition, and that made them stick. Now let's talk language and culture. Alfred's translations helped define Old English as a written language. That gave rise to an English literary tradition, the same one that would produce Beowulf, then Chaucer, then Shakespeare. He wasn't a writer himself, but Alfred made writers possible, and that's cultural legacy in action. Then there's the mythologizing. By the 12th century, chroniclers were calling Alfred not just a good king, but the model king. They told stories about how he invented the candle clock, how he disguised himself as a minstrel to spy on Vikings, how he founded schools, made laws, and invented civilization itself. Okay, that one's a stretch, but you get the point. He became a symbol of wisdom, resilience, faith, justice. And when England needed a national hero, especially during crises or wars, Alfred was dusted off and put back on the pedestal. In the Victorian era, boom, statue in Winchester. In the 20th century, he's on textbooks, coins, and royal speeches. Even today, he's got a Netflix docu-series vibe without even trying. And what about his values? Alfred's core principles, education, faith, defence, unity, became default settings for later English governance. His obsession with building systems, legal, military, cultural, created the kind of long-term stability that most medieval kingdoms never had. That's what made him different. He didn't just want to win battles, he wanted to future-proof a nation. So yeah, Alfred the Great died over 100 years ago. But if you, read in English, live in a nation with codified laws, expect your leaders to be educated, strategic, and morally grounded, you're standing in Alfred's long shadow, and honestly, that's a pretty great place to be. Let's rewind the tape. Before Alfred the Great became the guy who saved England, England was, well, barely England. Imagine a country where the Wi-Fi is down forever. Every local lord thinks he's a king. Vikings show up weekly like Amazon Prime with axes. That's cast 9th century England. A fragmented jigsaw puzzle of kingdoms, each with their own egos, laws, and frequent flyer cards to disaster. Here's the setup. There wasn't one England. There were 7-ish mini-kingdoms, constantly throwing shade and occasionally spears at each other. Historians call this period the Heptarchy. Wessex, Mercia, Northumbria, East Anglia, Kent, Essex, Sussex. And let's be real, half of these names sound like Harry Potter houses. By the 800s, this setup was falling apart. Why? One word, Vikings. The Viking Age hits England like a freight train of chaos. Starting in the late 700s, Norse raiders figured out that England was basically a lightly defended buffet of gold, grain, and monasteries. By 865 AD, things got spicy. The Great Heathen Army, yes, that's what they called themselves, invades England. Not just to loot, to conquer. Led by legends like Ivar the Boneless and Halfdan Ragnarsson. They show up with a master plan. Break every kingdom. Take every throne. Spoiler, it works! Northumbria, crushed. East Anglia, overrun. Mercia, hanging on by a thread. By the time Alfred enters the picture. Wessex is the last kingdom standing. Think about that. England's once proud line of kings, down to one guy. And even Wessex isn't in great shape. It's had its own share of infighting, shaky leadership, and Viking attacks. Its economy is fragile, its military overstretched, and its political alliances are iffy at best. And then, in 871 AD, King Ethelred dies, conveniently mid-crisis, and suddenly, Alfred was king, at 21 years old, with no military background, no grand title, no solid playbook. Just, brains, faith, and a giant pile of problems. Here's what he inherits: a broken defence network, towns burned or abandoned, a peasantry that's overtaxed and terrified, Viking warbands that treat England like an open-world conquest map. This is the prequel story no one wanted. How to lose a country in 10 raids. And yet, this wasteland of a nation would become Yeru's canvas. Because here's the twist. Alfred doesn't crumble. He studies, he adapts, he waits, and slowly, piece by piece, he begins to flip the narrative, from chaos to order, from fear to structure, from collapse to kingdom. But it only makes sense if you understand where he started. Before Alfred, England wasn't under siege. It was losing the war, losing its soul, losing the very idea of itself. That's why his rise matters. That's why the great isn't hype. That's why the legend endures. Next episode, Alfred's origin story, how a sickly boy with no throne ended up becoming the most unlikely saviour in history. Before he was Alfred the Great, he was just Alfred the Kid with chronic illness and a weird obsession with books. Seriously, the man who would one day body Vikings and invent public education almost didn't make it to adulthood. Let's dive into the most underdog origin story in royal history. Alfred was born in 849 AD, the youngest of 5 royal brothers, in the Kingdom of Wessex. That means he had exactly 0 chance of becoming king. He was the spare. And to make things worse, Alfred was sickly. We're talking stomach issues, chronic pain, probably autoimmune. Historians still argue over it. Whatever it was, it debilitated him. He'd spend days laid up while his brothers trained for war or played politics. But Alfred read. That's not a joke. From a young age, he developed a deep love for raw poetry, prayer, and philosophy. According to Asser, his monk biographer PR manager, Alfred was sent to Rome at age 4 to meet the Pope. While most toddlers were learning how not to fall into wells, Alfred was getting blessed by the Bishop of Rome. Talk about foreshadowing. But the real pivot, Alfred wasn't supposed to rule. His brothers were, but fate had other plans. Over the years, his older brothers, Ethelbald, Ethelbert, Ethelred, each ruled and each of them died. Some from illness, some from battle, all before reaching old age. By 871 AD, Alfred is suddenly the last man standing, and it couldn't come at a worse time. That's the same year the Great Heathen Army of Vikings is ravaging Wessex. His brother King Ethelred dies mid-crisis. The throne is offered to Alfred at age 21, and he's got 0 prep. Imagine being the introverted younger brother with chronic IBS, and one day someone hands you a sword and says, "Congrats, you're the last hope of civilization." That's Alfred's entire vibe. And yet, he rises. Why? Because the illness didn't make him weaker. It made him tougher. All those years in bed. He wasn't sulking. He was studying. Learning how power works. Learning how faith can bind people. Learning that kingship isn't muscle, it's mind. While others trained with spears, Alfred trained with strategy. And when the crown finally dropped into his lap, he didn't panic. He analysed. He made treaties with Vikings when he had to. He fought when it counted. He used every ounce of insight from his sickbed days to lead like no one else in Anglo-Saxon history. That's why his illness is key, because this isn't a story about a perfect hero. It's a story about a broken boy who became brilliant. A king who led not in spite of his weakness, but because of it. Alfred's coronation in 871 AD wasn't a party. There were no fireworks, no cheering crowds, no victory lap. There was just as a kingdom on fire. Wessex was the last Anglo-Saxon stronghold left standing. Barely. This great heathen army was rampaging across England like a Viking version of a demolition crew. And Alfred? He was 21 years old, sick, exhausted, and completely whole alone. Welcome to the trial by inferno. That was his first few years as king. Step 1. Get beat up a lot. Alfred's early reign was one long losing streak. He fought at the Battle of Wilton in 871 and lost. Badly. He was forced to repay off the Vikings and just to buy time. Not a great look for a new king. But he wasn't weak. He was calculating. He knew Wessex didn't have the manpower for a full war. The army was scattered. The burhs, fortresses, weren't built yet, and morale was in the toilet. So he played for survival. He reorganised defences, he built up reserves, and most importantly, he learned how the Vikings fought. Step 2. Face betrayal and burnout. Being king in peacetime is hard enough, but Alfred was running a military campaign, a government, and a recovery operation, all at once. With limited food, limited trust, and zero backup. Plus, some of his own nobles has ditched him. They thought he'd fail. They wanted to cut deals with the Vikings instead. And Alfred, he had to lead with half a court, half an army, and twice the pressure. But he never cracked. Instead, he became obsessed with structure. He started tracking hide counts, a land tax metric. He drafted proto-strategic blueprints for military response times. He made Wessex less about charisma and more about care function, because if his personality couldn't save the kingdom, his planning would. Step 3. Go into hiding. Literally. In 878, things hit rock bottom. A Viking army led by Guthrum launched a surprise winter attack and forced Alfred into exile. He fled to the swamps of Athelney, a cold, muddy, parasite-ridden no-man's land, and hid. Most rulers would call it quits, maybe write a sad poem and let the story end in tragedy. Alfred, he regrouped. The swamp wasn't his grave, it was his reboot, from Athelney. He built a small resistance force, smuggled out messages to loyal nobles, gathered intelligence, began plotting the Khmer counterstrike of the decade. The legend of Alfred burning cakes while in hiding. Yeah, that happened here. He was too busy thinking about military strategy to notice his bread was on fire. Iconic. Step 4. Come back swinging. In spring 878, Alfred returned, not just physically, but psychologically reborn. He rallied an army at Egbert Stone. Farmers, veterans, nobles who hadn't abandoned him, and at the Battle of Edington, he crushed Guthrum's Viking army. In one of the most important victories in early English history, he didn't just win. He forced Guthrum to convert to Christianity and sign the Treaty of Wedmore, dividing England and buying time to rebuild. These first years of Alfred's reign weren't glorious. They were raw, brutal, foundational. He wasn't born ready to rule. He became ready through fire, through failure, through insane levels of resilience. This was the crucible arm that made him more than a king. It made him, a system builder. Victory at Edington in 878 AD wasn't the end of Alfred's story. It was the beginning of his real reign, because once the blood dried and the Vikings backed off for now, Alfred had a terrifying new challenge. Peace, and peace, especially after years of war, betrayal, and swamp hiding, is as deceptively dangerous. Now he had to rebuild a kingdom that barely existed. Let's dive into post-war Alfred TM, the reformer, the strategist, the nation architect. Step 1. Fix the education system. Alfred looked around and realised something horrifying. Most of his nobles and priests were all illiterate. Not just can't read Latin, We're talking can't read, period. So he launched the first royal literacy campaigner in English history. His plan? Translate core Latin texts into Old English, set up schools for noble children, and eventually everyone, recruit scholars from Mercia, Wales, and abroad, standardise learning through religious and civic education. This wasn't about making everyone a monk. It was about nation building through literacy, because Alfred understood. You can't rule a country of strangers. You need shared language, shared laws, and shared identity. And that starts with easy reading. Step 2, codify and unify the law. Alfred wasn't just slapping together laws for fun. He took Moses and the 10 Commandments, old Anglo-Saxon tribal laws, predecessor king codes, like Ain's, Christian moral teachings, and he wove them together into a new, cohesive legal code. It wasn't just about crime and punishment, it was about justice and legitimacy. He even wrote intros explaining Jalwalanid laws exist, how they relate to God, and what makes a good king. That's legal theory, centuries ahead of its time. Step 3. Reimagine urban life with the burh system. We've covered burhs before, but here's the post-war twist. Alfred didn't just build them for defence. He used burhs as administrative centres. Each one had a fixed population to defence ratio thanks to the Burgle-Heidage dock, collected taxes, served as court locations, hosted markets, functioned as hubs for repopulation and economic revival. He basically rebooted English urbanism using war-ready mini-cities. Step 4. Reform the military. After Eddington, Alfred knew a static army wouldn't cut it, so he rotated troop service so farmers could still farm, standardised mustering protocols, built a navy to defend coasts, required every free landholder to support a burh defence. He took medieval chaos and made it modular and scalable. That's logistics. That's poor early military bureaucracy. And it worked. Step 5. Reshape identity through storytelling. Alfred translated Bede's history. He promoted stories of heroic Anglo-Saxon kings. He even created titles like King of the Anglo-Saxons, a flex that was aspirational, because England didn't fully exist yet. But in people's minds, Alfred made it feel like it already did. That's Cumbrian strategy, applied to an entire culture. All of this happened in less than a decade. He didn't have the time, money, or manpower most empires used to make big changes. What he had was a vision and just enough peace to act on it. So if you're wondering how Alfred went from swamp fugitive to legend, it wasn't the battles, it was the blueprint. He turned Wessex into a prototype for England, and England into an idea that would not die. Next up, a deep dive into Alfred's spiritual side, his faith, daily discipline, and why he believed God had put him on earth to teach. Alfred the Great didn't just think God existed. He thought God had assigned him homework. And that homework was nothing short of saving a nation. While most medieval kings flexed divine right as a power move, God chose me, so shut up. Alfred took a just radically different approach. He believed kingship was a divine responsibility, not a privilege. Ignorance was sinful. Ruling without moral clarity was kind of failure. Let's explore Alfred's spiritual blueprint, the inner engine of the most unlikely king in history. Step 1. Faith as foundation. Alfred's daily routine was relentlessly spiritual. He prayed 7 times a day. He kept a candle clock to divide the day into prayer intervals. He memorized and reflected on the Psalms, Boethius, and Augustine. His biographer Asser writes that Alfred would carry small books in his coat, texts on Christian doctrine, wisdom, and philosophy, like a king-sized theology student who never stopped studying. But here's what made Alfred different. He didn't separate religion from politics just to him. They were the same job. The law, rooted in scripture, education, a tool to spread moral literacy, war, justified only as a defence of the godly. He viewed England's survival not as luck or muscle, but as divine justice, a test of whether the people, and especially the king, were living righteously. Step 2. personal guilt, national ambition. Alfred was obsessed with sin, especially his own. He believed that England's decline and the Viking invasions were God's punishment for spiritual laziness, bad leadership, and personal vice. He even wrote in the preface of his law code that the decline of learning among priests and nobles was his responsibility to fix. This wasn't ego, it was a burden. He didn't just want to lead a better country, he wanted to lead a holier one. Step 3. The theology of kingship. Most rulers thought might makes right. Alfred thought wisdom makes might. He absorbed Gregory the Great's concept of pastoral care, the idea that a king must be a key shepherd, not a tyrant, that leadership requires gentleness, vigilance, and service. He translated Gregory's pastoral rule into Old English, then has personally mailed copies to bishops across his kingdom. With reading sticks. Yes, reading sticks. Because Alfred didn't just write edicts, he taught them. Step 4. God, grammar and grit. Alfred didn't just do religion, he thus systematized it. He created a canon of texts every noble and priest should read. He designed curricula for monasteries. He made Latin and Old English co-official languages for spiritual and civic life. This was Reformed theology meets administrative strategy. A 9th century king using scripture as a governance manual. And it worked. Because Alfred believed a morally literate people cannot be easily conquered. Step 5. A death with purpose. Even at the end of his life, Alfred didn't ask for comfort. He asked for clarity. He reflected on the afterlife. Theodicy, why suffering exists. And how to leave a kingdom better than he found it. To Alfred, legacy wasn't just about borders. It was about souls. He died in 899 AD, but left behind the framework of a Christian nation, one that would influence English law, education, and ethics for over 1,000 years. So next time you think faith and leadership are just buzzwords, remember, the guy who invented English kingship was also England's first theology major. Alfred the Great didn't just build a kingdom, he built a dynasty, and like all the best dynasties, from Targaryens to Tudors, it started with one visionary and exploded into generational greatness. Let's talk about the House of Alfred, the royal family that took the crown, the code, and the chaos, and ran with it. First up, Edward the Elder, Alfred's son and direct successor. Edward had a brutal job description: inherit a fragile kingdom, hold off Viking attacks, maintain the reforms, and not die early. He nailed it! Edward took everything Alfred built, the burhs, the literacy campaigns, the legal system, and doubled down. He refortified towns across southern England, expanded Wessex into Mercia and East Anglia, solidified military logistics. But his real genius, he let family politics just do some of the heavy lifting. Which brings us to Helflede, the Lady of the Mercians, Edward's sister, Alfred's daughter, absolute icon. While most medieval women were being married off or sidelined, Ethelfled became ruler of Mercia, and not just in title. She led troops into battle, retook Viking-held towns, Derby, Leicester, Tamworth, strengthened border defences, reinforced Christian identity across the region. She even negotiated with Welsh and Irish rulers. People called her the Lady, but in practice, she was a queen in all but crown. She wasn't just continuing Alfred's work, she was innovating on it. Together, Edward and Ethelfled turned the tide. By the time they were done, the Danelaw was shrinking fast, and Anglo-Saxon England looked stronger than ever. This was no longer a post-Alfred survival state. It was a rising nation. Next up, Athelstan, Edward's son, Alfred's grandson, and England's first true king. Athelstan took the dream all the way. He united all of England under a single crown, crushed Viking and Scottish forces at the Battle of Brunanburh, arguably the most important battle in English history, promoted literacy, religious reform, and international diplomacy. He was the first king recognised across Britain as a ruler of all Anglo-Saxons. In essence, Alfred dreamed it. Athelstan did it. But let's pause. This wasn't automatic. Alfred's success as a father and founder wasn't about genetics. It was about preparation. He trained his children in Latin and scripture, leadership and law, military command, public duty. They weren't pampered royals. They were mission-driven civilizers, and it showed. The House of Alfred didn't just hold the line. They pushed it forward. From Edward to Ethelflaed to Athelstan, they carried the flame of Christian kingship, legal reform, military strategy, cultural literacy, and the ripple effect was massive. By the 10th century, England was no longer a fractured archipelago of rival chieftains. It was one kingdom with one voice. That voice spoke onto Old English, used Alfred's law, fought Alfred's war, prayed Alfred's prayers. So the next time you wonder if one person can make a difference, look at Alfred, then look at him as kids, and realise greatness isn't inherited, it's trained. It was spring, 878 AD. Wessex was down to its last breath. The Vikings controlled almost all of England. Alfred was hiding in a swamp. The Anglo-Saxon resistance was scattered, leaderless, and exhausted. But deep in the marshes of Athelney something stirred. A fugitive king, a last-ditch army, a rallying crewn for a civilization on the brink. This is the story of a Creedington. The casus duodecus moment that then saved England. Let's set the stage. The Viking warlord, Guthrum, had launched a surprise winter invasion, smashing Alfred's army and seizing major strongholds. It was a strategic masterstroke. Wessex, the last Anglo-Saxon kingdom, all crumbled overnight. Alfred, forced into exile in the marshes of Somerset, living on scraps, evading capture, and praying for one more chance. And in May of 878 that chance came. Step 1. The comeback begins. Alfred emerged from Athelney like the king reborn. He lit sutter beacon fires year across the countryside, summoning every loyal thegn, soldier and farmer who hadn't given up hope. Within days, he had an army, not huge, not glamorous, but desperate. This wasn't just a military campaign. It was Rahana resurrection. Step 2. Battle prep at Egbert's Stone. Alfred met his forces at Egbert's Stone, a symbolic site where old kings had rallied their people. There, he organised units into shield walls, delivered speeches invoking God and country, unified nobles under feisty single command. From there, they marched straight at Guthrum. Step 3. Clash at Edington. The battlefield? A ridge near modern-day Eddington. The weather? Probably cold, damp, miserable. The mood? Apocalyptic. Alfred's army formed into tight shield walls, overlapping rows of wood and steel, grinding forward like a human tank. Guthrum's Vikings charged, wild, brutal, fast. The two sides slammed together in a close combat that lasted hours. It wasn't elegant. It wasn't epic poetry. It was us blood screaming and resolve. But Alfred had something the Vikings didn't. Unified command, discipline under pressure. A cause bigger than plunder, and slowly. Inch by inch. Alfred's army began pushing the invaders back. Step 4. Victory. By the end of the day, Guthrum's forces were shattered. They retreated to their fortress. Alfred laid siege. Within weeks, Guthrum surrendered. But Alfred didn't kill him. Instead, he did something radical. He baptized him in a symbolic gesture of both mercy and domination. Alfred turned a Viking warlord into a Christian and rewrote the war in spiritual terms. This wasn't just about land anymore. It was about redemption. Step 5. The Treaty of Wedmore. Guthrum agreed to convert to Christianity, withdraw from Wessex, accept boundaries between Danelaw and Anglo-Saxon lands. And Alfred got our breathing room, space to rebuild, space to reform, space to redream of something bigger. Why does Eddington matter? Because it wasn't just a battle. It was, for me's turning point, in the Viking Wars, a victory that preserved the idea of England. The moment when one man's resilience changed civilizational trajectory. If Alfred had lost, no unified England, no common law, no English language, just ashes. So yeah, Eddington isn't just important, it's everything. You want to unite a war-torn country? Don't just swing a sword. Don't just write laws. Don't just build towns. Preach. Because in 9th century England, the most powerful tool wasn't a weapon. It was God. And Alfred the Great used faith like a scalpel and a sledgehammer. Let's break down how he turned Christianity into a full-blown nation-building strategy. Step 1. Rebranding the war. When the Vikings invaded, most kings saw it as politics. Alfred saw it as theology. To him, the Norse weren't just raiders, they were agents of chaos. Pagans sent to punish a morally lazy people. Their gods, Thor, Odin, Freya, were as rivals to Christ. So Alfred reframed the Viking war as spiritual warfare, not Wessex versus Danes, light versus darkness, Christendom versus heathendom. This wasn't just dramatic, it was unifying, because people will fight to defend their homes, but they'll sudden to defend their damn faith. Step 2. Baptism as power move. After the Battle of Edington, Alfred didn't execute Guthrum. He baptized in him. This wasn't kindness, it was a dominance. In front of a royal court, Guthrum kneeled and Ores wore loyalty not just to Alfred, but to Christ. He got a new Christian name, Athelstan. He was even given godparents, Alfred included. It was a kind of public ritual of submission, and it told the world, Christianity wins, Alfred's God wins. This kingdom wins. Step 3. Religious uniformity, national identity. Alfred didn't tolerate religious pluralism. Why? Because in his view, divided faith meant a divided kingdom. So he rebuilt churches, retrained clergy, standardised Christian teaching across Wessex. He insisted on moral literacy. Laws were tied to the 10 Commandments. Sermons aligned with the royal policy, and religious texts were translated into Old English, so as everyone could understand them. He even wrote prefaces to translations explaining why spiritual education was critical to civic survival, because to Alfred, ignorance was a threat to sovereignty. Step 4. Prophets and politics. Alfred saw himself as God's instrument, not in a messiah complex way, it's a more responsibility way. He believed his suffering, illness, exile, war was God's test, and that his survival meant he had work to do. This made his policies feel divinely sanctioned. His court wasn't just enforcing rules, it was delivering justice ordained from above. And it worked, because a king who believes he answers to a higher law tends to rule with a longer view. Step 5. The international message. Other Christian rulers noticed. Alfred became pen pals with the Pope, Frankish nobles, ecclesiastical leaders across Europe. He positioned Wessex as the last Christian bastion in a Norse-dominated island, and that earned him prestige. Scholars came, resources came, his reputation as a saviour king spread. He wasn't just a local leader, he was as Christendom's frontline general. So what do we learn from all this? That Alfred's Christianity wasn't just personal, it was political, practical, powerful. He didn't weaponize faith, he'd civilized with it. The swamp was cold. The swamp was wet. The swamp didn't care that you were a king. Welcome to Sthelny. In 878 AD, Alfred the Great wasn't great. He wasn't even a king in practice. He was a fugitive. Alone. Sick. Broke. Hunted. Hiding in a patch of marshland smaller than a football field. But what happened in Athelney? Changed everything. Let's rewind. After a surprise winter ambush by Guthrum's Vikings, Wessex collapsed almost overnight. Alfred's army was scattered, his court was gone, his family was in hiding. So he fled, deep into the swamps of Somerset. He didn't go there to win, he went there not to die. Step 1. Isolation. Athelney wasn't some tactical retreat base, it was like survival mode. Cold mud, swarms of bugs, no supplies, zero visibility, surrounded by water and reeds. You couldn't farm, you could barely breathe. Alfred lived with a tiny band of loyalists, maybe 20-30 men, scraping by on whatever they could trap or scavenge. Most of England thought he was dead, and honestly, he almost was. Step 2. Reflection. But this wasn't just physical exile, it was spiritual exile. Alfred spent days, possibly weeks, in prayer, meditation, and theological study. He asked, why did God let this happen? Was he unworthy? Had he failed his people? These weren't rhetorical. He agonized over them. He believed kingship was a calling, and now that call was on mute. So he looked us inward. Step 3. Vision. Athelney became his crucible. In that swamp, Alfred realized that victory wasn't about outswinging the Vikings. It was about outlasting them, outthinking them, outorganizing them, outbelieving them. He didn't just want to survive Guthrum. He wanted to outlive him, and not just as a man, as a legacy. Step 4. The cake story. Yes, now that cake story. According to legend, Alfred was once so deep in thought about military plans that he forgot to turn the bread cakes on the fire. The peasant woman whose house he was hiding in scolded him hard. She didn't know she was yelling at a king. He didn't pull rank. He apologized. It's a funny story, but it's also true Alfred. Humbled, grounded, focused on bigger problems than bread. Step 5. Rebirth. Eventually Alfred left Athelney, but not as the same man. He emerged with a plan, a purpose, and a faith forged in fire and mud. He lit beacon fires, he summoned his troops, and he marched toward Eddington. Not as a desperate survivor, but as a Curra-born leader. The swamps didn't break him. They made him. So next time you see a leader fail and vanish, don't count them out. Because sometimes the swamp is the classroom, and the man who comes out of it burns brighter than the man who went in. You want to stop Viking invasions? Don't pray harder. Build walls. Big ones, smart ones, organised ones. After surviving exile and winning at Eddington, Alfred didn't just celebrate. He went full engineer mode. The result? One of the most ambitious defence networks in medieval Europe. Welcome to the Burr system. Step 1. What the heck is a burr? Pronounced like burr. A burr. It was more than a fortress. It was a sea military base, marketplace, administrative hub, refuge centre, logistics node. Think of it as a mini capital, one per region. And Alfred built dozens. Step 2. The Burgle Hidage. This was the master spreadsheet. A military logistics document written in an Old English as a listing. Each burr in Wessex. How many hides, households were needed to support it? How many men were needed to defend its walls? Example. If a town had a 2,400-foot wall, Alfred calculated exactly how many soldiers it needed, at 4 men per 12 feet of wall. That's just logistics before Excel. Step 3. Spread them out. Alfred spaced the burrs so that no town was more than a day's ride from another. Every major river and road was protected. Refugees during attacks had somewhere to flee to. Trade could flow safely even during wartime. This wasn't random. It was a network thinking. Medieval infrastructure design. Step 4. Make it economic. Each burr had a market, tax collectors, local courts. So Alfred turned fortresses into functioning towns. People weren't just forced to defend them. They really wanted again to live in them. Because inside the burrs, there was safety, law, commerce. Outside, Vikings? Easy choice. Step 5. Everyone pays. Alfred made burr defence a civic duty. Each hide of land had to provide soldiers, maintain supplies, support construction. He tied military readiness to land ownership. No more waiting for nobles to maybe show up with their troops. This was systematic defence. Step 6. Fortress plus fleet, total defence. Alfred didn't stop at burrs. He also built a navy, smaller than later English fleets, but fast and efficient, designed to intercept Viking ships before they landed. So with the burrs on land and ships on water, Alfred created the first coastal defence grid, a response system, based on signal fires and scouts, a military that could rotate troops without collapsing the economy. Genius. Why does it matter? Because this wasn't just defence, it was a nationhood. Alfred's burr system created civic pride, standardised urban planning, tied military service to citizenship, laid the foundation for the medieval English state. And it worked. After Alfred, Vikings didn't stop invading. But why have they stopped winning? So next time someone tells you they're building infrastructure, ask them, yeah, but does it come with a battle plan? Because Alfred's did, and it turned cut swamp survivors into a superstate. Kings usually leave behind castles. Alfred left behind curricula. That's right. The man who fought Vikings and built fortresses also spent hours translating philosophy books by candlelight. He wasn't just a warrior king, he was a one-man publishing house. Let's dive into how Alfred rewrote England's bookshelves and changed a nation's mind. Step 1. Why translate? In Alfred's time, most people couldn't read, and the few who could read Latin, which meant the great wisdom of Western civilization was inaccessible to 99.9% of the kingdom. Alfred's solution? Translate it, simplify it, distribute it. He wanted every freeborn Englishman, not just monks, to access knowledge, because literacy wasn't just about learning, it was us national survival. Step 2. The Circle of Five. Alfred personally chose 5 key works to translate into Old English, books he believed every leader and priest should know. They were 1. Gregory the Great's Pastoral Rule, a guide for how to lead people morally. 2. Boethius, Consolation of Philosophy, a deep dive into fate, suffering, and divine justice. 3. Augustine's Soliloquies, Meditations on the Soul and Self-Knowledge. 4. Bede's Ecclesiastical History of the English People, the backstory of Christian England. 5. The First 50 Psalms, spiritual poetry with theological weight. This wasn't random. It was just a syllabus, and a spiritual and intellectual starter kit and for building a thinking kingdom. Step 3. Alfred the Editor. He didn't just translate word for word. He's edited, he's explained, he's commented. His prefaces often included reflections on the importance of learning, apologies for his own lack of skill, humble flex, commentary on England's moral decline, plans to restore knowledge as a national value. In Boethius, he even rewrote certain parts to better fit Christian worldview, blending translation with theology and politics. He wasn't just copying, he was curating. Step 4. Old English becomes elite. Before Alfred, Latin was the language of power. After Alfred, Old English became a language of learning. He proved it could carry complex thought, express philosophical nuance, serve as a vehicle for cultural pride. This was a linguistic nationalism, a rebrand of what it meant to be like English. Step 5. Literacy, leadership. Alfred didn't think books were optional. He believed every leader needed to read. In his prefaces, he said kings and bishops had become useless again because they couldn't understand law or scripture. So he ordered schools for noble children, clerical training reforms, standardized texts across the realm. This wasn't a book club, it was a literacy revolution. So what do you call a king who translates Latin, rewrites theology, invents a curriculum, and makes literacy cool? You call him Alfred the Great. Before smartphones, before sundials, before watches with alarms, there was Alfred's candle clock. Yes, the King of Wessex invented a way to measure time with fire. Why? Because Alfred didn't just want to survive, he wanted to schedule greatness. Let's unpack how Alfred the Great became England's first time management guru. Step 1. Why time mattered. Alfred had a big to-do list. Defend against Viking invasions, rebuild cities, educate a nation, translate 5 major philosophical works, raise kids, rule a kingdom. That's more than a full-time job. And there were no calendars, no bells, no wristwatches. So Alfred did something genius. He engineered his day. Step 2. Enter the candle clock. Alfred designed a candle clock system using 6 candles, 12 inches high. Each candle divided into 12 sections. Each section burned for about 20 minutes. So 1 full candle, 4 hours of time. He kept these candles in lantern boxes to block wind. And then he timed everything. Prayer, study, meetings, sleep, reflection. This wasn't OCD. It was spiritual discipline meets strategic governance. Step 3. Time as sacred rhythm. For Alfred, time wasn't just utility, it was cus divine. He believed the day should reflect the rhythm of heaven. Time should be divided between work, worship, and wisdom. Wasting time was a form of moral failure. In fact, he modelled his daily schedule on the rule of St. Benedict, a monastic system of hourly prayer and labour. He applied Tassamonk logic to king duties. That's productivity with your eternal perspective. Step 4. A ruler with a routine. Most kings ruled by impulse, Alfred ruled by Rye clock. His day likely looked like: dawn, candle 1, morning prayers and planning. Mid-morning, candle 2, military affairs and Burr reports. Midday, candle 3, translating books, reviewing laws. Afternoon, candle 4, education and family matters. Evening, candle 5, religious study and correspondence. Night, candle 6, final prayer, rest, silence. That's not tyranny, that's just intentional living. Step 5. Time becomes national culture. Alfred didn't hoard this. He used the candle clock system to coordinate military rotations, regulate monastic schedules, align court sessions and public markets. By measuring time, he would standardize daily life. And that created consistency in a chaotic world. In a land recovering from invasion, that mattered a lot. Why does it matter today? Because Alfred proves something timeless. Leadership isn't just about charisma, it's about consistency. And consistency requires structure, discipline, time awareness. So if you think managing your Google Calendar is hard, try doing it with live wax and fire. Alfred the Great ruled a kingdom, but he couldn't rule his own body. From his youth to his death, Alfred lived with your chronic illness. The exact diagnosis? Still debated, but the symptoms were real and were relentless. Stomach pain, exhaustion, flares of agony that crippled him for days. And yet, he still rebuilt a nation, fought off Vikings, and created the foundation of England. This is the story of Woes, Pain and Power. Step 1. What was wrong with Alfred? Historians and doctors have speculated for centuries. Theories include Crohn's disease, irritable bowel syndrome, epilepsy, autoimmune conditions, psychosomatic trauma from early life stress. Whatever it was, his symptoms appeared young in around age 12 and never left. According to his biographer Asser, Alfred experienced intense and recurring pain, attacks without clear cause, sudden weakness and discomfort. This wasn't just discomfort, it was debilitating. Step 2. How illness shaped his mind. Alfred spent long stretches in bed. While others trained with swords, Alfred Ussers read. He memorized psalms, studied Latin texts, listened to priests and scholars discuss theology, morality, and suffering. He didn't just escape into books. He researched for answers. Why does a just God allow suffering? How do you lead when you're broken? These aren't academic questions. They were his daily reality. Step 3. Empathy through pain. Alfred was unusually compassionate for a medieval king. He forgave Guthrum after Eddington, gave land to monasteries and poor parishes, reformed justice to reduce abuse and exploitation. And that empathy was fueled by pain. He understood what it meant to be helpless, how suffering can isolate, why mercy matters. Alfred's leadership wasn't just strategic, it was deeply human. Step 4. Energy management, legacy. Alfred knew his energy was limited, so he delegated often, created systems like the Burr network and legal codes that outlasted him, focused on big levers. Education, law, defence, instead of vanity projects. He didn't try to do everything. He focused on doing what mattered most. That was chronic leadership strategy. Step 5. Pain as prophetic fire. Alfred believed his illness was a divine test, a way for God to keep him humble, focus his spirit, sharpen his resolve. Rather than resent it, Alfred framed her. His suffering became his teacher. His pain became his pulse. It pushed him to use his time wisely, to think clearly, to lead better. So when you hear Alfred the Great, remember, he wasn't great or because he was strong. He was great because he was hurting and kept going. In 899 AD, Alfred the Great had lived for 5 lifetimes in one. He'd fought off Viking invasions, rebuilt a broken kingdom, translated ancient texts, reformed law and education, raised children to carry the flame. But even greatness meets its limit, and in the quiet of his final days, the last candle began to burn low. Step 1. The final illness. Alfred had never known good health, but in the last year of his life, his body gave way. The pain intensified. His energy waned. The king who had once marched armies and rewritten law spent more and more time in bed. According to chroniclers, he remained sharp in mind, gentle in spirit, devoted in faith, even as his strength left him. His purpose did not. Step 2. Preparing for death. Alfred wasn't afraid of dying. He saw it as graduation, a return to God, a closing chapter in a book he'd written with fire, tears and parchment. He made sure his son Edward was ready to rule, his law codes were updated, his translations were distributed, his vision for England would outlive him. No panic, no last-minute grasping, just resolution. Step 3. The day of death. On October 26th, 899, Alfred the Great passed away. He died surrounded by family, mourned by nobles, monks, and farmers alike. The only Anglo-Saxon king to be called great in his own time. There were no grand monuments yet, no Hollywood soundtrack, just the candle quietly extinguished. Step 4. The funeral. He was buried at Winchester, the capital of Wessex, in a church he'd helped support. But over the centuries his remains were moved, lost, and possibly destroyed. Today, no one knows exactly where Alfred's bones lie, but his presence is everywhere. Step 5. The myth begins. Alfred became legend almost immediately after death. Chroniclers wrote of his wisdom, piety, discipline, and courage. Teachers praised him as England's philosopher king. Common folk told tales of the king who once burned cakes in exile, and future kings worshipped his model, from Athelstan to Edward the Confessor, even to Henry VIII, Queen Elizabeth, and Winston Churchill. All invoked Alfred as the beginning. The year rooters to the year blueprint. The Yul's king who made kingship mean something. So what does it mean to live a great life? Ask Alfred. He didn't seek fame, he didn't build empires, and he just did the work. Built the schools, fought the fights, lit the candles, and when the time came, he let it go. Alfred the Great died in 899, but he didn't disappear. In fact, over the next 11 centuries, Alfred didn't just remain relevant, he's kept evolving. From medieval chronicles to royal propaganda to modern archaeology, Alfred's legacy became a living mirror, reflecting the hopes, fears, and dreams of every era that followed. Let's explore the life of a legend. Step 1. The chroniclers canonize. Shortly after his death, Alfred's life was recorded in the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, Asser's Life of King Alfred, monastic histories and oral tradition. These weren't dry reports. They were tributes. Alfred was cast as the ideal Christian king, defender of the faith, patron of wisdom, warrior philosopher. And by the 11th century, he wasn't just remembered, he was immortalized. Step 2. The Norman rewrite. When William the Conqueror invaded in 1066, he needed legitimacy. Enter Alfred. Norman scribes connected William's rule to Alfred's reforms. They said, "We're not invaders, we're continuing Alfred's mission." By co-opting Alfred's legacy, they turned a conquest into continuity. A pattern was born. Step 3. The medieval Alfred boom. In the 12th, 14th centuries, Alfred appeared in royal genealogies, romance literature, historical epics. He became a model of courtly virtue, a proto-knight, a symbol of English resilience. Some texts even claimed Alfred invented trial by jury, the English Navy, Oxford University. Were those true? No, but the Yasmith Kaz mattered. Step 4. The Reformation recast. In the 16th century, Protestants loved Alfred. Why? Because he translated the Bible, parts of it, challenged corruption in the church, empowered lay education, To them, he wasn't just a king, he was England's first reformer. Alfred became a spiritual ancestor to Protestant England. Step 5. Victorian nationalism. In the 19th century, Alfred became thus the father of the British nation. Statues were raised. Schoolbooks called him the greatest Englishman. He was used to promote empire building, moral education, civic duty. Even Queen Victoria knew was styled as his spiritual heir. The irony? Alfred would have hated empire, but his image had momentum. Step 6. 20th century rediscovery. World War I and II brought Alfred back as a wartime symbol. Defender of homeland, beacon of moral clarity, blueprint for duty under fire, but scholars also began deconstructing. The myth, separating fact from fiction, analysing texts critically, debating what Alfred actually did, and something beautiful happened. The truth was still inspiring. Step 7. Modern Alfred. Today. Alfred appears in documentaries, academic debates, archaeological digs, historical fiction, English school curriculums. He's not a superhero, he's a mirror. Every generation finds something different. Courage, discipline, faith, reform, wisdom, resilience. Because Alfred's legacy isn't just about the past, it's a conversation with the present. Kings usually rest in splendour, marble tombs, gold coffins, eternal tributes. Not Alfred, England's greatest king. Vanished. No grave, no bones, no confirmed resting place. This is the greatest cold case in British history. The mystery of Alfred's lost tomb. Step 1. The original burial. When Alfred died in 899, he was buried in the Old Minster, Winchester, the royal cathedral of Wessex. It was a fitting place. Centre of power, Alfred's chosen capital, home to saints and kings. But then, things moved. Step 2. Relocation number 1, New Minster. Shortly after his death, Alfred's son Edward built a New Minster raised next door. Why? To house royal relics and elevate Winchester's sacred status. Alfred's body was moved from Old Minster to New Minster. Still honoured, still central, but this was just the beginning. Step 3. Relocation number 2, Hyde Abbey. In 1110, the Norman kings decided to make more space. They demolished New Minster and moved Alfred's bones, again this time, to Hyde Abbey, just outside Winchester. Alfred was buried alongside his wife Ealhswith, his son Edward the Elder. The tomb was marked with a stone and shrine. And then came the centuries of chaos. Step 4. The dissolution. In the 1530s, Henry VIII declared war on monasteries. Hyde Abbey was dissolved, its buildings looted and destroyed. The monks were expelled, the tombs were ransacked, the records were lost. Some say Alfred's bones were quia scattered. Others claim they were quia burned or dumped. Still others whisper they were quia stolen and hidden. No one knows. Step 5. 19th century blunders. In the 1800s, a prison was built on the former abbey grounds. During construction, workers found bones and coffins. Did they preserve them? No. They but tossed them into piles. Alfred's possible remains may have ended up in unmarked graves or landfill. That's not history. That's just tragedy. Step 6. Modern forensics. In the 20th and 21st centuries, archaeologists launched multiple digs. It was in Winchester. In 1999, a mass grave of bones was examined. No conclusive match. In 2013, a pelvic bone was carbon dated and tested. Again, no confirmation. DNA testing limited. Royal remains for comparison unavailable. The mystery remains unsolved. Step 7. What's left today? A modest memorial marks Hyde Abbey's grounds. It reads, "Near this spot was buried King Alfred the Great." Not quite a throne, not even a stone coffin, just an educated guess. The king who gave England its spine as skeleton. But maybe that's the point, because Alfred never wanted monuments. He wanted us in movement, justice, books, unity, and while his body may be lost, his legacy isn't. It lives in the English language, the British legal system. Every free citizen who reads and questions. He didn't need a tomb. He built in a country. Through swamps and scrolls, battles and books, cakes and candle clocks, Now it's time to answer the question. Was Alfred the Great really the greatest king in history? Here's the case. Exhibit A, the military mind. Alfred faced the apocalypse, a Viking invasion so total, every other Anglo-Saxon kingdom fell. He didn't just survive. He fought back from a swamp. He rebuilt an army from nothing. He won at Edington against the odds. And then, he built a fortress network, so effective that future Vikings just stopped bothering. He made us defence a system, not a gamble. Exhibit B, the lawgiver. Alfred rewrote the legal code, not with tyranny, with balance. He combined Mosaic law, Christian ethics, Anglo-Saxon custom. He created a system where justice became civic identity. His laws emphasised mercy, consistency, accountability. Not bad for a guy with no legal training, just moral clarity. Exhibit C, the educator. Alfred believed ignorance was a national threat, so he translated Latin books into English, reformed education for nobles and clergy, commissioned a national reading programme. He wasn't content to rule the ignorant. He wanted thinkers, and he practised what he preached, personally translating philosophy, theology, and history. How many kings can say they did homework for their country? Exhibit D, the spirit. Alfred ruled with humility. He believed his crown was a responsibility, not a right. Even at his peak, he lived simply, prayed daily, and suffered privately from chronic illness. His strength didn't come from perfect health or divine right. It came from more discipline, clarity, and compassion. And his faith? It wasn't used to conquer. It was used to heal. Exhibit E, the legacy. Alfred's England became the seed of the modern British state, the cradle of English language development, the gold standard of Christian kingship for 1,000 years. He inspired the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, English common law, the Protestant Reformation, Victorian nationalism, Winston Churchill's rhetoric, the concept of a moral nation under rule of law. And he did it without conquest. No empire, no genocide, no palaces dripping in excess. Just a good governance. So why does Alfred win? Because he fought bravely, ruled wisely, suffered quietly, built lastingly, read constantly, prayed sincerely. And when he died, he left us no golden tomb, no colossal empire, just a people who could read, fight, and believe. That's not just a king. That's just a blueprint. That's Alfred the Great. Thank you for joining the journey. All hail the Candle King, all hail the Swamp Survivor, all hail the Quiet Goat. The first, the last, the so great.